I think that's a great transition to a conversation around outsourcing, right? So when you look at outsourcing, you brought up the fact that people usually start thinking about outsourcing as a way to save money, but you actually can improve your offering and your security standpoint from your security standing from that standpoint. So I guess a little bit when you think about CPA firms outsourcing, well, one, what should be the reasons you look at it at all? What should be the impetus for starting?
Yeah, so it's tearing down that terror wall, right? So when you start thinking about outsourcing, and you're going to go across the pond, right? We look at communities throughout the globe, right? So you look at India, you can look at the Philippines. There's outsourcing happening in South Africa. There's outsourcing happening in Mexico, and some of the even in Spain and the UK, right? I've seen multiple outsourcing businesses or organizations stood up a lot in the last year or so. And what you have to look at, again, it's a vetting process. I can tell you 9 years ago, when I was working at the firm, we sent out a survey and asked our clients about outsourcing their work. And hands down, it was, no, I don't want my stuff to go offshore. But as we've had resource constraints here in the US, and we've had more conversations with our clients, and we've educated our clients on the advantages of it, that we can, maybe if it's India, that they do the work when we're asleep, and then we get finished work and to review it and to get it over the finish line. And clients are a lot more understanding of the whole outsourcing process if we're communicating it properly. So we need to vet the organization we want to leverage, and we need to be communicating. Those are two key components that will bring down, but you got to bring down that terror wall first of, oh no, I'm not even considering outsourcing, but yet you're short-staffed and you're having a hard time getting deliverables out the door.
Yeah, I think that I personally have had experience outsourcing both in the Americas and working with teams in India or Europe, and I get both your point, right? The getting work done while you're asleep and you come back. What are the communications or coordination challenges if you're time zone displaced like that?
Right. So a couple of things can happen. One is the team, you go to bed at night and you've handed off the work and they have questions and they have to put down the work because they don't know how to proceed, right? Because they have a question, something's come up, and so there's an obstacle, and so they move on to the next project. And so there can be that disconnect, and you're wanting that work, you need it by 9 o'clock the next morning, and they've had to put down pickup kind of thing. So that can lead to some issues within an organization for sure.
Does that change the kind of work or maybe the urgency of the work that you assign to the outsourcing team, or do you look at having diverse, you mentioned Mexico, right? Do I have Mexico and India both so I can assign work depending on time urgency, or what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to prioritize, right? So you and to have a really good workflow system in place where the status of the work, when the due dates are, right? Again, here we go. I'm going to go back to technology. Leveraging a tool, right? Leveraging a tool that you can manage your practice with, and you prioritize those things. So if it is very urgent things and you have relationships or you've built partnerships or signed on the dotted line with a couple of outsourcing firms, and then you can do that. And a lot of this is driven on the size of a firm, the number of clients they have, the type of work they're doing, right? So you have to take a lot of things into consideration, but that's not off the table if you have a big priority project and to have an alternative outsourcing resource.
Yeah, I'll say I've also, you don't want this to happen to your firms. I worked with a firm in the Ukraine prior to the war, and when they got displaced, actually most of them ended up in Spain. But when they got displaced during the war, it was a big disruption. How do you take into when you're selecting partners? Do you actually, do you do a geopolitical analysis to figure out if it's in a stable location, or how do I do that?
Well, I think you have to have a disaster relief policy in place, right? Right? Like we require this of our vendors, like where, if the systems go down, well, who's backing it up, or how are we going to be able to restore it? So, it's sad that we have to think about, what could happen, but if you don't, you're in a really bad place if something does go awry. So building out those processes and procedures around your outsourcing practice, where it's going, who's doing it, when it's being done, and if something were to happen, how do I transition? And really, it's amazing that we've moved so much of our work to the cloud. When COVID hit and I was in practice, right, as a practitioner at the firm, we stood up hundreds of clients in bill overnight because everybody in these businesses that we weren't doing accounts payable for, they had to go home. They couldn't touch tech stock, right? And so we had here we go, back to tech. We had a piece of technology that we could deploy in case of emergency. And it was a huge benefit.